Chris, why are people in today's society experiencing more burnout? What has changed, and what can we do to change this trend?
Wow, big question. So, I mean, in answer to that, I mean, there's so many things going on. I think that's what we have to appreciate. There isn't a single answer or a single factor, which is why people are getting burnt out. From my research and kind of the work I've done, I think it's coming from a number of different things. And one of those is that the world we live in is far more disruptive, it's far more chaotic, it's far more unpredictable, and it's changing rapidly. I think we all feel that.
Yeah.
Um, and it's from my view, it's only going to get faster. Now, I'm pretty optimistic about how we handle that if we do certain things, and I'm sure we'll dig into those. But that's certainly one of the things that I see is the world's just changing rapidly, and we've got so much information coming at us, and we can only deal with so much. There's only so much data that we can actually process. And the other thing that we've been doing, which is kind of again where we'll probably take this conversation, is for the past 200 years or so, we've been actively getting rid of the thing which makes us humans kind of thrive, flourish, optimal, whatever words we want to add in there. We've been actively getting rid of it, and that thing is playfulness. Because when we're playful, we can cope with situations, we can cope with ambiguity, we can cope with setback, we moderate stress, we find positive possible futures, all these wonderful things. And when we get rid of playfulness in our lives, either accidentally, which could come through massive amounts of stress or trauma, or purposely because we believe success looks like the opposite of playfulness, or we just try and get rid of it in work, um, then burnout, chronic anxiety, chronic stress, all of these things that we see going on around us, they all build.
How That's an interesting theory you have there. Why do you think that this happened? How do we get to a point where we have lost, as you said, in the last whatever 200 years, lost that playfulness?
I'm going to throw a few people and ages of human society under the bus
Hmm.
here. Um, for, for me, there's we've got to go back to we've got to go back probably pre-industrial revolution. We've actually got to go to probably the Reformation era. And what was going on here? I mean, if we rewind the clock even further, actually, if we go back to the Renaissance period, we find a period of time where playfulness was celebrated. And you saw this in the works of, massive kind of thinkers of the day who were multi passionate people who drew off multiple pools of knowledge and ideas and brought them together to give us some of the best human works we still have around today. Then we come to the kind of the Reformation period and certainly Industrial Revolution. And what we start to do is we start to think about efficiency, austerity, actually getting rid of some of these things which make us human, because we're now in the pursuit of production. Certainly, as we come into the Industrial Revolution era, where you hire workers not to think, but to pull a lever or to shovel some coal into a fire. You don't actually want them to be creative. You don't want them to be curious. You don't want them to have social connection and all these things we talk about today. You want them to turn up and actually exchange their physical biomass, their physical muscle, their physical being, in kind of exchange for some money to produce something for you. And we've still got a massive hangover of that. We see it through all the kind of the time management, very traditional management theories, as a kind of a hangover today. So when you talk to people, obviously I talk a lot to kind of corporate leaders, entrepreneurs, CEOs, HR directors, all these kind of people. And when you introduce the word playfulness, certainly in a work context, it's not surprising sometimes to see people kind of like their eyes widen and go, oh my word, as he just said, the playfulness work in a professional space. Because we have this weird sense that professionalism and success doesn't look like playfulness. And it's because we've completely missed the point of what playfulness is and what it does to us. And we think of it as what kids do. That's how it's been promoted. But playfulness is, in my opinion, our pathway to being optimal. It's where we get our best thinking. It's where we do our best work. It's where we come together as a team or an organization or a human species.
Hmm. That's quite interesting. In fact, it makes me wonder if part of the fact that corporations, companies don't allow playfulness or don't allow creative work come from the fact that if you let them to be more creative, to have more fun, they might even be motivated or inspired to seek other avenues and to leave work. In fact, if you keep them under a tight leash, this is what you do, then the person's only focused on that. What are your thoughts about it?
Yeah, absolutely. And kind of, I agree with what you're saying. Is it does. We can actually see through research that playfulness, when it's higher in individuals, they have higher what we'd call kind of intrinsic motivation. They're self-motivated. We also know that playfulness is kind of it's a kind of social lubricant, that it brings us together in a brilliant way. It doesn't mean that we agree with everybody, but it allows us to actually have tough conversations, to challenge each other without kind of, I don't know, kind of losing our rag with somebody. I was going to swear then. I managed not to.
It's all good.
But yeah, kind of playfulness allows us to actually deal with very tough situations in a way where we remain in control of ourselves. And that's what I think what we miss when we start talking about playfulness. But in terms of that management space that you're talking about, it's not surprising. Us humans, we love familiarity. We love routines. We love habits. We're wired that way, that the more we do something, the bigger the pathways in our brain come for that connection, for that habit. And so when we have an old way of doing something, it takes an awful lot of time for that to be completely eradicated or replaced, because we have this kind of inbuilt biology and way of thinking and love of the familiar and love of the old and traditional route that we have to overcome to actually get there.
And see, what you're saying there, I can relate, because I feel some level of rigidity when I try new things. Right? It's
Mm,
just like we don't like change. If it's not familiar to me, I feel uncomfortable because again it's new, and then I feel
sure.
that I'm not being myself. Now on your TED talk, which is again is I really enjoyed your storytelling and the way that you deliver that message. Is the how can you avoid burnout and thrive in times of change?
Mm,
You mentioned a lot of playfulness and a lot about a muscle that you build, and I feel that anything that you want to do in life, whether it's you want to be more empathetic, you want to be a better conversationalist, you want to become a better listener, these are muscles that you can exercise and you can master those skills. When it comes to playfulness, how do people start training that muscle and start seeing things from a playful point of view?
so I think first, before we get there, well, firstly, thank you
Yeah.
so much for what you just said about my TED talk. That's lovely
Yeah.
that you kind of enjoyed it. Um, And before we kind of get to how do we enhance playfulness, maybe we should talk about exactly what playfulness is, because we've kind of talked
Yes.
roughly around the edges of kind of what
Mhm.
it might do for us as human beings or teams or
Mhm.
organizations. But I think it's important to actually define what playfulness is. And this is actually where it becomes really, really hard, that we all intuitively know what play and playfulness feels like. But when we come to actually define it, we often find ourselves lost for words. And even you kind of talked about kind of this feeling of rigidity when you try something new, which is probably the opposite to playfulness, where you're willing to try something new or willing to take a challenge or a risk. So the first kind of separation we have to do is we have to separate out play and playfulness. Play is kind of the best way I can put it is an engagement in an activity. So it could be playing games, it could be playing football, it could be playing board games with family at Christmas, it could be whatever, dancing, singing. It's being engaged in an activity. Playfulness is a mindset, and so sometimes play includes playfulness, sometimes it doesn't. But playfulness is the mindset we bring to a situation or an activity or a game. And why I'm saying kind of sometimes we bring playfulness to play and other times we don't is again, you'll know from your own experiences. You can go play a sport, tennis, football, rugby, soccer, whatever sport you might be into. And you'll know there's days where you turn up and you're playful, and there's days you just turn up and you just kick a ball around. and it's not playful. You're playing a game, but you're not playful. So playfulness is all about mindset, and that's where my specialism comes in. So the model I built of playfulness revolves around 3 pillars, and these 3 pillars are curiosity, creativity, and connectedness. So if we're high in those 3 areas, I would say that we are playful. We're highly resilient. We're highly adaptable. We're able to bring teams together. We're able to cooperate, challenge, and kind of just work with others in a beautiful way. We're able to come up with new ideas and be innovative and adaptable. So, kind of with that background, does that, by the way, does that help define what playfulness is?
Quite a lot. I'm very thankful that you actually brought, because that was something that I've been struggling with since I listened to your talk. It's like, okay, what is playfulness? Because a lot of people, we have these concepts in life like success or mental toughness that people sort of know what they are, but they cannot truly define it. And when you don't know the true definition or something, then you cannot embrace it because you don't know exactly how you need to behave or act. And it's very insightful that you attach playfulness with mindset. It's a way of living, a way of thinking, of the way of experiencing life. And when you say what, creativity, curiosity, and connectedness, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
How I understand the power of curiosity. I understand how thinking outside the box can get you more creative. But how connectedness ties into these other 2 pillars?
So connectedness is kind of essentially, to me, so if we kind of like examine each pillar individually and what it does for us and why playfulness is the sum of all 3. And if you're interested, by the way, what I'll do is after this, I'll send you a link, because there's a free online quiz assessment, I should call it. Quiz makes it sound like it's not academic. uh, which scores you on my 3-pillar playfulness scale. And so you can actually find out for yourself how high do you score on each of these 3 pillars and what's your total score. But so let's kind of go through each of the pillars individually, and then hopefully you'll see where these come in and why, when we sum them all together, that's a playful individual. So curiosity, the way I define it in the playfulness model, is actually the joy of discovery. So let's take a situation which we find overwhelming. It could be in work. So this is kind of now where we start talking about burnout, anxiety, stress. If you're constantly in a setting where you're feeling this kind of perceived stress, so essentially what we'd say you're cognitively appraising the situation that's beyond the resources you have. What curiosity does is it kind of think about an open mindset, think about a learner's mindset or a student mindset. It actually allows you to kind of orientate yourself towards finding possibilities or finding challenges or learning more rather than simply being overwhelmed. So that's the curiosity piece. What's really nice, and again, kind of just to kind of paint the picture a little bit for your audience, I'm sure you're familiar with the term of flow, like a flow state, where we're in this like real deep focus state where we kind of do amazing work, we lose track of what time it is and everything else, and it feels really easy. Flow actually occurs between curiosity and creativity. So that's where it happens. And hence why when you look at a lot of the flow research, play and fun and humor, playfulness come into it. Playfulness can be a great way to find a flow state, because it's the bridge between curiosity, trying to find something out, and creativity, making or finding something new. And that's where flow happens. So let's move on to creativity as a kind of this second pillar. I promise for your audience, we will come back to how do you actually enhance playfulness eventually. But so creativity is then the piece of its production of something novel, of something new, creating something new. And we get so much energy as humans from doing that. I believe, that's one of the biggest driving forces for human progress, for innovation, for I don't know, when we see technological revolutions and everything else, is we have an inbuilt desire to create new things. And that's the creativity piece. When we then come to connectedness, playfulness isn't just an isolated kind of thing. We can be playful by ourselves, But typically the way it shows up is we also are highly sociable with others when we're playful. That's part of what playfulness is. It doesn't necessarily have to be within the task, but it can be within collaborators. It can be an opponent as a challenger. It can be working as a team. And if you think back to kind of playfulness within children, I mean, let's take it back there. Play often happens in that setting where it's a way of actually bringing kids together. And if we look at it kind of from an evolutionary point of view, because all of these things don't hang around by accident, it's not kind of like, oh, it's a happy accident that we're playful. They serve really important functions. And play within animal species is a vital communication way. If you kind of think about rough play within animals, play is actually one way to say no, or it's one way to show safety. So if you think about kind of, I don't know, a lion cub like playing with another of its brothers or sisters, it might kind of mouth another one as if it's going to kill it, but it's play, and the other cub knows because it's not going so far. It can't say you're safe and you're part of my tribe because they can't use words like us humans, but they use play to communicate in really, really vital messages. So connection, or that connectivity piece of playfulness, is really important as well. And when we're high in all three, I would say that we're a highly resilient individual. And kind of bringing this all the way back to some of the stuff you were talking about stress and burnout, where playfulness is so protective from stress and burnout is because we tend to be more connected to others. So there's tons and tons of research around if we're isolated and lonely, we're far, far more at risk from things like depression, anxiety, stress, burnout, all of these things. We actually, as humans, we co-regulate. So if we're around others who are supporting us, have you might call it a kind of give off a good energy, they're essentially playful individuals, then we gain so much from them. We pick up on where their nervous system is firing, and we kind of move towards them. And so you'll know this. If you walk into a room and you've got, I don't know, a couple of friends who are really down about something, you instantly pick up on that. We're constantly communicating with that kind of way. And so within the playfulness space, actually, that's one of the mechanisms we believe that helps us regulate when we're highly stressed, is that kind of connectedness to others and a connection to safety between others.
Well, now I can see how all three pillars relate to each other. How do you need to ask a better question to see things from a curiosity standpoint and not be overwhelmed? How that curiosity can lead you to creativity, just find different answers, but then you need to feed off other people because we're a social species. We perform better when we are in tribes or with other group of people. But you touch a point that is very not only valid, but it's like things that is happening in today's world is the loneliness part. A lot of people are tend to be more isolated, myself included, especially doing the podcast. Is very I only get to talk once or twice with interesting people online, but most of the times I'm just doing my work by myself. I'm just focused on editing and growing the show. In those cases where I've experienced in the last 2 years, yes, depression, anxiety, all of that, and I've gotten out to some extent. If those people who are lonely, because we're experiencing a loneliness epidemic, how can they? If it's hard for them to create connection with other people, how can they just work on the other two and find some playfulness to get themselves out of that situation, that low mood or that lack of creativity?
So I think kind of the optimistic message here is the way I like to promote playfulness is kind of the opposite to how we promote things in our modern culture. In the modern culture, let me explain what I mean by this, because I'm speaking in riddles. That was not intentionally too playful. But the way that we tend to promote things is I often talk about kind of we distill things down 2 steps too far. So businesses, organizations, team will talk endlessly about wanting more creativity. about wanting their staff to be more curious, and they'll send them on a training day to be creative. And it's just completely the wrong way to do it, in my opinion. And some of the things you've been talking about there is kind of the way we actually get these things is we unlearn. So we shake off a lot of the societal and kind of social conditioning that we're given. And kind of the way to increase playfulness is actually, so one of the best techniques that I've come across, and I think I mentioned this in the kind of the TEDx talk, is essentially you just commit to doing tiny bursts of playfulness. So it could be, it's just essentially shaking things up. Because when we're playful, we're finding new possibilities. So what I kind of say is if people can go out there and they just challenge themselves, even if it's one thing per day that they do differently than they've ever done it before. So I can remember I've done this a few times in my life, just for a little bit of fun, and also I practice what I preach. And so I can remember I did a 30-day stint of doing something different. The first few days are very easy because you just go, okay, well, I normally use the front door to get to my car. I'm going to use the back door. Or I don't know, I eat all your meals standing up one day. And then after a few days, what happens is you have to start engaging curiosity and creativity because all of the simple low-hanging fruit are done. Like you can't just keep finding very easy things to change. You have to start using your imagination. Like one morning I got out the foot of the bed instead of the side. And what you find, and people are probably laughing at this going, what is this guy on about? But what you find is once you start shaking small parts of your life up, there has this ripple effect. You start to actually identify living on autopilot and the routines which you're just stuck in. And you start to also see that you can shake up and break those routines. You start to see that there are endless possibilities to everything which you just take for granted. And as you do that, that's you becoming more playful in my eyes. As you do that, your level of connection, your level of creativity, your level of curiosity all rises because it's all part of the same thing. That we don't just have one or two pillars. When we start to unlearn the societal conditioning we've got, when we return to our optimal state, because let's be honest, that's what we're doing. We're not trying to learn how to be playful. We all know how to be that. We've just got a ton of limiting beliefs and things we mustn't do. And we can't do that. Oh, I couldn't possibly do that because somebody think bad of me. Once we get rid of those, we come back to an original kind of factory setting, which is perfect. So that's one of the ways. I mean, there are countless ways. I do a mentoring program and coaching program. So there's lots of different ways, but that's one key one I'd normally talk about and give away. Is that kind of just idea of just shaking things up every day, because it shakes you out of being on standby mode or kind of this autopilot program where you don't even notice the routines you're in.
See, I love that what you share because I think that ties to the question I asked a few minutes ago: how do we exercise this muscle, right? Because in my mind, when I was after reading about you, after watching your talk, it's like, okay, I don't know exactly how to apply playfulness because, as you said, we confuse playfulness with play, and then say, okay, how can I build this in a way that it feels normal? And by the way, in many cases, those small things feel pointless. It feels like, okay, this is embarrassing, but it's who you're becoming. It's just exercising that muscle. And it's like if you want to run a marathon, you probably have to walk a mile. Feels insignificant, but eventually you'll get there. So I like how you the way that you challenge yourself of changing even small things. Like, okay, I usually work when on a chair. Well, I'm gonna use the stand-up desk, or I'm gonna leave through the garage and not through the front door. Those things that might seem pointless, and
Yeah.
I'm telling this to myself because I question myself a lot. Is, well, eventually you will just exercise that muscle, and the more exercise it, the better you get at getting more creative. Which that is something that I'm going to start applying into my life and see how I do it because I want to become more playful. And for some reason, I've been quite serious most of my life. I don't know if just because I'm the oldest child, I just wanted to lead by example. Kind of very stoic and perhaps even kind of rigid, instead of being more fun.
Yeah.
And even though I do have a good sense of humor, I like laughing, but in most instances, I feel that my default setting is being very, very serious, just go down to business. How can I change that? I think a lot of people feel the same way as well. How can we change that, especially when we feel highly uncomfortable, as we mentioned just earlier, during those moments when we try to be different, and it's almost like, one, we have no idea what we're doing, and two, we feel that we're not being ourselves.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think so. I think the starting point for that is awareness. Um, is actually doing some deep thinking. So I've just written a post for LinkedIn actually, which was called, I'm going to forget what I titled it. I'm going to make it up and I'll change it if I get it wrong. Uh, but it was something like what I learned doing 1,000 aimless walks. So right at the beginning of COVID, I started to kind of just go out for a walk, and it wasn't with any intent. I wasn't trying to get somewhere. I wasn't trying to get my steps in. I wasn't trying to walk the dog. I wasn't listening to an audio program or a podcast. I just wanted to go out just to have time in my own head. And one of the things I learned through that is kind of actually when you carve time out to step back. So stepping back is really, really important. So I developed a method called the pause, play, move method. So PPM method. And it's a way of getting into playfulness when you're struggling. And the pause comes first. So for me, these kind of aimless walks, as I'm calling them, were an excellent way to do a pause, to actually physically step back from life, cognitively step back from life, and just look at it from a bigger perspective. When you start doing that without trying to fill your head with somebody else's ideas through an audiobook or a podcast or anything else, just with your own thoughts. And sometimes people find that scary because they're like, oh my word, I'm going to be left alone with my own brain. But it's okay. You start to actually gain an awareness of how you think and some of the beliefs which start cropping up. And when we come to playfulness, this is absolutely key. It's like what we were just talking about before. Why are workplaces not embracing this thing which is ultimately human power? And it's because there's so many limiting beliefs around what playfulness is and what it isn't. And the same thing happens around seriousness and what we believe professionalism looks like. And the more time you can step back and actually analyze that for yourself, i.e., kind of where are you picking up from your own narrative, your own script, your own family, your own culture, your own society, we're given all of these different messages of what, I don't know, a successful professional looks like. And in Western society, it tends to be, we're fighting against this, certainly from a sexual point of view with males and females. But traditionally, we've held this image of it's a kind of a male wearing a business suit, looking very kind of cool, calm, collective. And that's what we try and aspire to. Hence why it kind of leads to all of these other issues of kind of sexual discrimination, because we're going, okay, well, success looks male, not female. But also when we're coming down to playfulness, if we hold that within our own heads, that professional success or success in life looks like this, being serious, being rigid, being hard-headed, being stoic, being, I don't know, just always having an answer, then guess what? It shows up and it stops us being relaxed, flexible, rigid, fun, playful, humorous, because we've got this ideal going on. So the first step is that pause. And however you do it, whether it's through kind of meditation, whether it's through mindfulness, for me, as I said, walking slowly. And this is a very bizarre tip, but I have a smartwatch and I average 2.2 miles an hour when I'm walking. So it's extraordinarily slow. It's so slow that my girlfriend gets really, really, she won't come on one of these walks, which is actually good for me because it's meant to be in my own head. But she's like, you're dawdling, you're strolling. This is just pointless. But that's kind of the point, that it is meant to be pointless. You're not going for exercise. You're going to spend time with your own thoughts. And it's not an area of neuroscience that I'm particularly an expert in. I can't tell you why that slow walking works, but it shows up in many cultures as a brilliant way of just kind of getting deep into your own real deep thinking. So within Eastern cultures, there's walking meditations. Kind of one of the great grandfathers of behavioral science, Daniel Kahneman, the late Daniel Kahneman, talked about kind of the best thinking he had was when he was strolling along. So coming back to your question, it's about gaining awareness and insight into some of the limiting beliefs that you have and questioning, simply just questioning, why do I have them? Do I need them? And if not, why am I holding on to them? Those often work as kind of blocks to the people we want to be. And again, kind of one of the great kind of tests of that is, I think you said, I want to be these things, but I can't. So you phrased it something like that. You don't feel completely authentic.
Mm-hmm.
And so you're already identifying in yourself that you know there's a different version of you if you could get rid of some of these limiting blocking beliefs. And sometimes we can do that work by ourselves. Sometimes we need to bring in a coach or a therapist just to help us kind of blow them out of the water. But that's the key starting point, is to actually examine, what are we holding on to? What's the narrative we're running and playing?
Yeah, I think that, and this is something I've brought up in the podcast in the past. It's just we don't have enough idle time. We're so distracted. We have we're exposed to so much content, information, our phones, TV, all of it, and having that walk or just sitting and looking at a wall for an hour or think those help us create awareness. Yes, and I think that part of it is, we, at least from my personal experience, we get to tend to attach to our identity based on how we have behaved for the last 20, 25 years, 30 years, right? That just moving out of it is just so hard, because it's like, well, but this is who I am. And we don't give our future self a shot at being different if we're too attached to our current identity. So I think a lot of things that you're talking is unlearning a lot of stuff we learned over the years, and we're ingrained into our brain subconscious and basically the way we live life, and just learning new things. So you talk about the pause of becoming more aware, creating that self-awareness. That, to me, it is highly important. Everyone should become more aware, especially of themselves, how they think and how they behave, and why they feel the way they feel. And once they reach that, what is the played and movement parts that they can do to, I guess, unlearn what they have now and learn new things to become a different person.
Yeah, so I think it comes back to a combination of what we've just touched on. Because for me, it's not necessarily chasing down, and okay, I've got this to-do list of things I now need to do. We're talking about playfulness, which is a natural state. It's something that we don't have to, I don't know, you don't have to give a kid a manual of like, okay, read this before bed and then you'll be playful tomorrow. We just, as humans, we know how to be playful. As animals, certainly kind of mammals, there's an awful lot of which are playful. It's something just built into us. And so this combination of examining kind of what our beliefs are and our identity and where that's come from, and is it something that we've just subconsciously picked up or chosen? That's certainly one part. Getting used to doing different things, as we just talked about, that is definitely a second part. And the combination of those two, what happens is you start to question some of the things you're holding on to, which you perhaps didn't even have any awareness. And that's the beauty and perhaps benefit of working with a coach or therapist, is they can be a mirror and they can shine things back to you which you had no idea you were giving out. So awareness is key. Shaking things up is key, because also what you learn there is you learn that boundaries aren't fixed. They're malleable. They're things to be broken. Playfulness is being slightly rebellious. And as we start to embody that, we start to use that knowledge and that experience in other areas of life. Because I can guarantee that kind of, well, 99% of your listeners, even if they are stressed, even if they're burnt out, there'll be moments of their day where they are playful. And it's harnessing and amplifying those moments, which is key. is understanding, okay, well, what's actually going on to foster this playful state? And it could be actually being around somebody, it could be doing a certain activity, it could be in a certain setting. And so most people actually find that they are already playful, they're just not playful enough. It's not learning something completely new. As we keep saying, it's about unlearning a lot of things and returning to a state which was previously there. So for me, it's a natural process. There is one other thing to kind of add in here, and that is, perhaps we should talk about the kind of connection between playfulness and stress, because what I'm talking about here is our kind of like our stress response, our physiological stress response. So obviously, as humans, we have this stress response, and it's served us extraordinarily well. We must be careful not to say that stress is bad, because actually stress is a motivating force. When we write a to-do list, we're trying to get some stress in us to actually do something. When we set a goal, we're trying to find some stress to actually move towards the future we want. And also kind of the stress response is ticked on when we perceive threat. So kind of, if we go back far enough, a few 100,000 years, it would be the lion walking past our cave door. And in that moment, you don't want to be playful. You want to be stressed. And the outcome of that is fight or flight or even freeze. And so what we actually see from stress science and the research behind stress is that when we're firing certain stress circuits, we can't access states of playfulness. And so playfulness is the opposite, if you like, of a really highly stressed situation. Playfulness shows up with optimism, not pessimism. If I contrast between these two, it shows up with kind of this beautiful kind of mass possibility of thought. Kind of we can even create with our imagination alternate universes and realities. Whereas when we're stressed, we're normally so rigid on one single idea that we can't even see past it. And there are very good evolutionary reasons why, because you don't want a multitude of ideas when you're faced with a lion. You want to be focused on one. So we can also identify, and again, this is part of the awareness piece, is we can identify where we're firing on that stress response, because part of our job of being human is to regulate that stress response. And that's partly getting ourselves pauses, it's partly giving ourselves rest, and it's partly understanding things which trigger us and questioning why these things are triggering us. Because if we really want to be playful, then it happens at the opposite of this massive fight and flight response that we have, which has protected us and keeping our species alive for centuries, millennia. But playfulness is the opposite. The issue we face in our modern world, is where playfulness comes in so massively, is that we now live in a world where it's less likely to meet a lion, but we are constantly cut up by other drivers on highways, freeways. We constantly get emails saying, oh, this project needs to be in yesterday, and you've still got 3 weeks work left on it. All of these things. And we end up in a chronic state of stress. And playfulness comes into this because, as we were talking about before, is if we learn to moderate our stress response, which we can do, by the way, then we start to be able to get into a playful state and then actually start to meet these challenges head on. And that's not to say that we never get stressed again. Of course we do. We're human. And it's not to say that things don't tip us over the edge and we're not overwhelmed ever again. Of course we will be. But we learn the pathway back to playfulness. And when we do, we can tolerate more ambiguity. We can tolerate more challenge. We can push forward with far more energy.
You just opened my mind when you said that we cannot playful we're stressed, and the chronic stress is something that I can relate to. It is something that I got addicted to stress, and I think a lot of people gets addicted to stress as well. We have a period of our life, 2 3 months, maybe longer, that we experience a lot of stress, and then our body gets conditioned to feel stress all the time. It's kind of like a necessity. If I don't feel stress, then I feel that I'm not being productive. So I need the stress to feel that I'm accomplishing things, even though that might be a belief system that I need to challenge and change and become more playful. I think that's why I've been struggling with being playful, because I'm stressed all the time. But I guess in part, I can see how if you react differently to somebody cut you on traffic, or just or just an email, or somebody walking very slow in front of you, right? But how about when we experience setbacks? We all do experience setback in life. That's just part of being human. But for most of us, setbacks are tough on an emotional level. I mean, as you know, they can blind us or they can even overwhelm us. And you talk about turning setbacks into opportunities. What are the mental exercises that we can practice to turning setbacks into opportunities?
So I think you're going down the same rabbit hole again
Okay.
of trying to
Okay.
find a specific answer of what you can learn to do this. And so I'm going to kind of go back and just
Okay.
say foster playfulness, cultivate playfulness, and it's a natural byproduct that then shows up that you're able to tolerate more ambiguity. In the TED talk, I kind of it was an ocean special TED talk, so it had to be about the ocean. And for me, my childhood memories. So I've always lived by the sea. I live in North Wales, so I live on the coastline. But for me, my mum always used to tell me stories of kind of ocean going explorers and adventurers. And one of the ones which stuck in my mind was Sir Ernest Shackleton and his expedition. I mean, it was an ill fated expedition in that they were sailing to Antarctica. They were a day's travel away from their intended landing, and disaster struck. The ship became pinned in the ice. And I mean, at this point in time, there's no one else. No one's coming to save them. That ship was stuck in the ice for 10 months. And then it finally sank, by the way. Shackleton was like really, really famous for saying that the quality he looked for most in the crews he was kind of putting together, the expedition teams, was what he called optimism. But if you actually look at what he's talking about, he's not talking about optimism as in like, yeah, I don't know, you wake up and you go, oh, isn't it a lovely sunny day? I love this life and things like that. That's kind of how we define optimism today. He was talking about kind of, I'm going to get his quote wrong, but kind of people who could embrace song and laughter in the face of kind of adversity. I think he used the word kind of, I'm sure he said kind of without food or water or something along those lines. And that is an optimism. That's playfulness. That's reorientating yourself towards a positive possible future, which is a byproduct of just building playfulness. And what we see in Shackleton is not only that crew all came home, but they pulled off perhaps the greatest rescue mission of all time in humanity. Because once that ship sank, I mean, they had an 800-mile voyage in a lifeboat, and then they had to walk over a mountain range to get help. I mean, it was absolutely incredible. And when you see what Shackleton did with his men, it was all to keep their spirits alive. So he would have card games, dog sled racing, football matches on the ice. They were there for 10 months. I mean, it's absolutely incredible. So I get the question you're asking, but for me, it's about cultivating playfulness when we don't even need it. If we can make ourselves a really playful individual today, when something bad happens in a month, a year, 10 years, we've practiced on the mat. I mean, the Olympics is kind of going on at the time of filming and recording this podcast. And there's a great example. Those gold medal athletes don't just turn up and go, oh, let me see if I can swim 500 meters today. They've practiced on the mat and they know that routine inside out so that they can show up and they can do their best. Does it mean it goes perfectly? Absolutely not. And the same is true for us, is that we're in this world of massive disruption, of massive chaos, massive uncertainty. And we've got to do the job of practicing being the best human we can be. And the best human we can be is playful. We've got to practice that in the moments we don't need it. So in the moments we do, we know what to do.
So it's basically almost having hard conversation with people when we're all in a good mood, where we're not arguing, right? It's just like having those moments where if we try to be playful in the moments of stress, we're never going to be stressed. We just need to have those in the moments where our bodies and nervous system are more relaxed. I would,
Yeah.
I
Yeah,
would assume.
absolutely.
So when it comes to that thing, 'cause the story that you brought up now and also at your TEDx about this rescue mission, it talks a lot about mental toughness, right? Because
Mm,
I then read the story after your talk, and I realized I don't even know how you can keep the optimism, the good, or just the faith,
mm,
and rally the troops around you just to move in one direction, and being able to rescue those who was stranded, and find help and all of that. When it comes to that, because I'm kind of obsessed with mental toughness, and I've talked to entrepreneurs, athletes, but it seems like you have a different angle. How do we develop mental toughness in that regard?
Okay, so yeah, absolutely. I do have a slightly different kind of view, and this came from so when I was doing my original research in behavioral science. So this is going back to 2015. I was looking at essentially resiliency, hardiness, mental toughness in terms of how did investors evaluate losses and gains, and was there a correlation between mental toughness and how we cope with losses and gains? Um, where my thinking kind of got to, I guess I kind of have to give like the middle story in the middle before I kind of get to the point here. And that is that shortly after that, I was spinning multiple plates. That's me. I love doing that. I'm a multi-passioned person. But I wasn't taking pauses. I didn't understand playfulness at this point. And I completely burnt out. And I did it pretty well. I hospitalized myself for 3 days. It took me years to actually come back from it fully. But what happened was I was lying in a hospital bed, burnt out, thinking, hold on a minute. I'm a researcher of mental toughness, resiliency, and hardiness. I should be protected from this. What is it that I'm missing, that I've fallen foul of my own research and work, that I'm just not getting? And so today, actually, kind of where I put this is I put this on a scale, actually. So we have vulnerability, i.e., something bad happens and we break. We It overwhelms us. It's too much of a challenge. So we're in a vulnerable state. We then have mental toughness and resiliency, kind of as the opposite end of that, which is about bad things happen and we stay the same. We don't deviate. We bounce back. Where I place playfulness is beyond that again. It's bad things happen and we grow. That's what playfulness is. It's beyond mental toughness. It's beyond resiliency. Those concepts are about bad things happen and nothing changes. And that's okay. But there's a state beyond that, a natural state, this state of playfulness we're talking about, where we find things like post-traumatic growth, where we find growth from disorder, where we find lessons from setbacks. And you would start talking about this and people kind of, I don't know, in their heads kind of go, oh, this sounds like impossible. But then you have to come back. And if you sit with this for a minute and you reflect on your own life, many of the bad things, if it's not happened to you, then happened to other people around you, have been the most transformative experiences that they've ever had. And you ask many people who've been back through really bad things if they would give up that experience, as horrific as it's been. And many of them would go, no way, because it's taught me this. And so we're now talking about post-traumatic growth. That's beyond resiliency and mental toughness in my eyes. The other issue I have with mental toughness and resiliency is how we put it across. Is we often put it across as this kind of stoic, emotionless, flint-headed idea that we're kind of just like power through. That's great if you're in an elite military or you're an elite athlete. And why those two? Because we're talking about brief moments of hyper intense competition, setback, and stress. For you and me, who are trying to like push forward a business or a podcast or a book or a project, which is ongoing for months, potentially years, then if you follow those ideas which have come predominantly from elite sport and elite military research, is you just bury yourself. That's what I did in my burnout, is I completely buried myself. I was very, very high in control, challenge, and commitment, but there's no emotional intelligence kind of within those models. There's no reflection. There's no pausing. And actually, when you look at kind of those coming from elite sport, I've got a sporting background as well, is the rest period as an athlete is just as important as the performance period. But when we bring this forward into the business world, forget the rest period. We'll just work all the hours we've got. And then yet we still try and pick up the same ideas around mental toughness and resiliency. So yeah, so I've got some very different ideas about about that concept and where playfulness lies on that scale. I see it as way beyond resiliency and mental toughness.
I can definitely identify with the post-traumatic growth. In fact, in the last couple of years, I basically experienced one of the worst moments of my life. Deep depression. A lot of stuff happened, and looking back, oh, hindsight is always 2020, right?
Yeah.
I don't even know how I made it out of it. The I'm what 33 now. The most amount of growth I've experienced have been in the last 2 years because of the experience I lived. Now, would I want to put myself in that experience again? Probably not.
Mm.
If you ask me, would you rather just eliminate that experience, that pain, that suffering you went through, but at the same time you're losing the wisdom and the lessons you learned? It's like, if I do that, I'll probably have to experience it again and learn those uh, lessons one more time. So I'm trying to create a better relationship with pain and past experiences in a way that, okay, if I went through it, let me just make the most out of it. Let me learn.
Yeah.
Let me see how I can improve and how I can avoid this in the future. So I think I like what you're saying there. And yes, mental toughness we see a lot. Like if you tell me mental toughness, I think about David Goggins. It's the only thing. It's just like he embodies that thing. But we cannot be that way, right?
Yeah.
And everyone has their own demons. And I think having that flexibility and kindness towards yourself and learning, hey,
Mm.
this is what I went through. This does not define me, but I can definitely learn from it, which a lot of people struggle with.
Yeah, absolutely. So again, firstly, well done for making that
Mhm.
transition yourself and getting out of that place. Because I mean, let's define playfulness in a slightly different way, which might resonate really strongly with you, Daniel. And that is, so this is using a definition by a guy called Stuart Brown. And his definition, instead of trying to define it, he defined what it's not. And it's a very powerful way of doing it because playfulness means different things to different people. This kind of sometimes really hits the nail home. He said playfulness is the opposite of depression. And when we think about that, depression is a low energy state. It's part of that freeze mechanism of our stress response. It's our body trying to protect us from something outside. It's our way of the system doing it. It's also a place normally of hopelessness and helplessness. It's normally also a place of rigidity. We can't move. There's nothing to move towards. There's no hope of the future. We're in a kind of this state of zombification almost sometimes. Now, playfulness, if we put it to the opposite, playfulness is therefore high energy. It's hopefulness. It's opportunity. It's possibility. It's about moving towards an imagined beautiful future. And so sometimes when we put it in opposite to what it's not, suddenly something, and this comes back right to the point right at the start of this podcast, where we were defining the difference between playfulness and play. Now playfulness probably sits very differently in your head to what play is. Play is more to do with a board game and a sport or an activity, and playfulness is the opposite feeling of when you were the most depressed you've been. That's what playfulness is. That's why it's the pathway to flourishing. It's because it's a state where we can move forward from.
Hmm. I like that. I like how defining by knowing what is not the opposite. It's like, okay, if you feel hopeless, if you feel helpless, which a lot of people in depression feel, it's like, how can I change that? You probably have to change your mindset and your perception and the way that you see things. And it's going to be hard at the beginning because it's just
Mm.
like you're overwhelmed by the sadness and the and feeling dreadful, and all of that. But if you know exactly what to look for, the hopeful, the
Yeah.
being having a as you said, a beautiful future, envisioning that it's okay, I'm going to work towards that. I don't know, I might be delusional. we might be in World War III in a couple of months, but I I choose to believe that there is a better path that where I am right now. And I think it's the only way that we can pull ourselves out of it and apply playfulness.
Yeah, absolutely. And so what you've touched on there, I mean, often some of those concepts to somebody highly depressed or in a highly traumatic situation, you can't just think of a hopeful possible future. It's almost impossible. And so what you have to do is to come back to that idea of just do something different every day. I mean, it might be in a highly depressed or highly traumatized position. It might be actually just making the effort to cook your own tea or make a cup of tea once a week. That might be enough of a challenge to shake things up. And if somebody hasn't been depressed or hasn't been in a traumatic kind of experience, they might be listening to what I'm saying and going, just making a cup of tea. But if you've been highly depressed, you will know just making one tiny change, how much energy that can take, but also how powerful it can be once you start to gain that momentum of changing things. We suddenly start to see that there's a world beyond the one we're living. And that starts to rewrite itself and starts to actually rewire the brain.
Yeah, those small wins are massive. Once you
Mm.
start accumulating and stacking them, it's like brushing your teeth, taking a shower, going for a walk. Those small things that for most people seem okay, that is nothing, but for you, it's like, hey, for where I was and where I am now, that's massive. That's
Yeah.
huge. Chris, I'm enjoying this conversation quite a lot. But as a closing question, and I think that most people struggle with this, especially myself, it's like we struggle with uncertainty, and it's almost like there's a need for controlling things that we clearly cannot. How do we embrace uncertainty? How can we stop the fear of the unknown and develop a better relationship with it?
So again, I'm going to come back to you're wanting an answer so that you can read it and follow it. So one of the beauties of kind of playfulness and the research around playfulness is this idea that when we're playful, we have a higher, what we'd call within kind of behavioral science or psychology, a higher tolerance of ambiguity. Now, ambiguity is more powerful than uncertainty. Uncertainty just kind of says there's multiple options. We don't know which one it's going to be. So let's, I don't know, say rolling a dice. We don't know which number it's going to fall on. It's one of six possible possibilities. Ambiguity is we don't actually know what numbers are on the dice. So tolerance of ambiguity comes with playfulness. And the way I like to talk about this is there's always a liminal space, a space between the known and the unknown, a space between today and tomorrow, a space between kind of what we know as fact and what we imagine. And so when we're playful, we actually get used to using that liminal space, the space between, because it's where we start using our imagination, we start being curious, we start sitting with ideas rather than jumping to a conclusion. Because let's be honest, when we just suddenly jump to a conclusion, a knee-jerk reaction, you'll see this in so many people, that they jump to something and convince themselves that that is going to happen. And why do they do it? Because it brings some level of certainty. Certainty is something our brains crave. So we're all the way back to that stress idea. When we're low stress, we can cope with massive amounts of uncertainty when we're playful. When we're very, very high stress, we like and crave certainty. And we'll make stuff up in our brain even if it's not real. We'll just do it because it gives us some sense of reality and some sense of certainty. So as we practice playfulness, as we become more playful individuals, we become far better at just sitting with not having answers. It's just sitting with a question and multiple possibilities in front of us. And that is the same as uncertainty. Let's flip uncertainty around, actually. When we become really playful individuals, certainty is not something you run away from. Certainty is actually unlimited possibilities. If you have no uncertainty, you only have one option. If you have uncertainty, all of a sudden, it could go in any direction. And it's a springboard to actually figure out a path. And when we're playful, we use that. When we're not playful, we see it as threat.
Yeah, I guess would be a very it would it's, even though it's very simple, I think it's hard to rewire our brain and conditions ourselves to be more experimental, to just test things, to have fun without thinking, without worrying about, am I doing the right thing? Am I going to be successful? I'm going to find love? Or any of the questions that we might have that give us that stress response and makes us want to have control. And we cannot, I mean, the only thing that we can control is just what we do and how we react to things. And
Mm,
both how we react to things, as you said, avoid that knee jerk reaction and just be more flexible with how you view things. And what we do is just, if you apply playfulness, if you have applied experimentation and testing, and just see how things break, just to
mm.
say something, you would have a better relationship with the unknown or the future, probably.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and yourself. And for all those skeptical ones out there, kind of let's kind of just give their skeptical brain a little bit of data and fact. When we look at research around playfulness, it's not just about having fun or orientating towards a positive possible future. We actually start to see that playful people learn faster, they retain more information. You mentioned kind of love before. There's a reason why the number one thing that people say what they look for in another partner is fun, humor, playfulness, is because it's such a core part. So, like, if people have sat there going, "Oh, if I do this, am I going to make it?" Well, the facts, the research tells us that you're going to learn more, retain more, you're going to cope better with uncertainty, you're going to moderate stress, you're going to have higher emotional intelligence, you're going to be more attractive to potential partners. And actually, you're going to be far more charismatic and get along and collaborate with your team far better. So, if we actually just look at the research, hopefully that satisfies most people's skeptical brain of kind of like, oh, if I do this, is it going to work? The facts are there for us.
It's just the energy that you give to other people, and you start attracting things to you, whether success, love, wealth, you name it. And I think that's one of the reasons why I mentioned earlier that even though I'm kind of rigid, I'm kind of very serious, I know the potential of being more fun, of being more
Mm,
relaxed, of being more playful. And I can see how a lot of things can be solved internally, mostly
yeah,
because at the end of the day, solve internally is all how we feel and we control things. It's just doing that. And you mentioning that, it's true. What we look in a partner is, does that person have a good sense of humor, or does that person take himself or herself too seriously? It's like, we don't want to be with somebody like that. We want to see somebody who's like more chill, who enjoys life, and all comes down to playfulness.
absolutely. Well said.
Yeah, Chris, wonderful time. I really enjoyed this conversation. Very insightful. A lot of good things on how to change our mindset and our behaviors. But where can people find you, about you, your work? Where can people take the assessment of creativity, playfulness, connectedness, and all of that?
So probably if they want to connect directly with me, then LinkedIn is probably the best place. So it's just search Chris Marshall. There's a few of us, but if you
I'll
if you
put the
look
wrong.
for me with the wild hair and glasses,
Yeah.
it's probably me. Um, the other place, if you're interested in learning more and taking that playfulness quiz, then I founded the not-for-profit institute or organization called the Playfulness Institute. So that's playfulnessinstitute.org. Again, I'll give you the link. If you can put that in the show notes, then people can get there. There's tons and tons of information on there. If you run teams, organizations, or if you just want to enhance playfulness in yourself, we kind of comment on loads of different research stuff. We're constantly running programs on there. So that's probably the place to go if you're really interested in the playfulness stuff. But as I said, if it's finding out more about me, LinkedIn is probably the best. Um, and yeah, the TEDx that I did is
Yeah,
out
yeah.
there, is out there for people to watch.
So if people want to be coached by you, or you become their mentor, also LinkedIn, or do you have a specific website for those services?
Yeah, so I do a few coaching. I'll be honest to
Okay.
everybody that
Okay.
given all my other commitments, I don't have much time for coaching, but
Mhm.
I
Okay.
tend to have a handful of people
Okay. Cool.
on the go at any one time. The Playfulness Institute does run mentoring programs and workshops for businesses, so that's one angle. If it's specifically me, then chrismarshall.uk. easy to remember because I'm British. But yeah, chrismarshall.uk is where people can book either kind of kind of one-off coaching, longer run coaching, or even kind of keynote talks that I do. So yeah, a number of different places people can go.
Perfect. Yeah, I'll add those on the video itself, on the show notes, YouTube description, all of it, so people can find you and your work and just change their mindset, change the way that they live life for sure.
Superb. No, thank you so much, Daniel.
Well, thank you, Chris. It was a total pleasure having this conversation with you.